Hello and welcome to the On the Couch podcast, the podcast that gives you the view from the therapist chair. I'm your host, John Dennis, a licensed professional counselor. You're listening to OTC episode 72, Q&A session. Welcome back again, OTC listeners. Thanks for stopping by again. So today's episode, doing something a little bit different. We're going to be taking some questions that we've been getting at the podcast through email and different social media questions, and just trying to unpack them, tell a little bit about what's going on, and try to answer them the best that we can. So there are ones that we see quite a bit, either in our practice with people calling in asking for counseling or referrals, or online through the podcast. And it's stuff that I think is really relevant to mental health in today's world. So I wanted to take an episode and try to target some of these. Again, if you have questions that you want asked on air or want to contribute to the show, if there's a guest you think that would be really great to have on, you can send us that information at otcpodcast@parentfamilysolutions.com. And who knows, perhaps we'll read your question on air. All right, so let's dive in. All right, so our first question comes to us from Craig Siebert in Baltimore, Maryland. And Craig asks, is there a mental health crisis in America currently? So thank you, Craig, first for submitting that all the way from Charm City. Love it. Love Baltimore. The fast answer is yes. Without a doubt, there is a mental health crisis currently in America. And I keep telling people, you know, the things that we're experiencing with, like, you know, just the volatility in the housing market and the breakdown of the supply chain and, you know, all these different things. We're seeing this in mental health as well. And what we used to always run into, unfortunately, was a crisis in terms of resources and bed space when it came to inpatient hospitalization or partial hospitalization programs or things like that. And that's still an issue, sadly, especially with October, you know, the end of the first marking period in schools. That's a really rough time. As, you know, it starts to turn to fall, starts getting darker earlier, you know, people start dealing with seasonal affective disorder. This is a really difficult time for a lot of people in the year, but also just in the world with, you know, politics and race and school districts and vaccines and COVID and housing and supply chains, and, you know, just the list goes on and on and on. We're starting to see what I would say is a mental health crisis in other areas of just lack of supply in terms of psychiatrists, in terms of outpatient counseling, you know, therapeutic day treatment programs, you know, just services in the communities. There just aren't enough resources to go around to meet the level of need. You know, if you go to mhanational.org, they have a number of statistics on there, you know, just talking about how many people are requiring mental health services. So, you know, just in 2019, just prior to COVID, about 19.86, so almost 20% of adults experienced a mental health illness. So that's equivalent to nearly 50 million Americans. And that was in 2019, right before the pandemic. So, I mean, you can just extrapolate that out. I mean, over 2.5 million youth in the US are dealing with severe depression. Over half of adults with a mental illness don't receive treatment. That's totaling over 27 million adults in the US who are going untreated. And yeah, it's just, I keep saying, like, the wave just keeps on coming. We're seeing call after call after call for people requesting services, and essentially, like, not enough counselors and social workers to go around. A lot of the colleagues that I have in the community, they're singing the same tune, that they're filled up. They don't have any openings. They don't have any openings for weeks on end. Sometimes they're booking months out. And we used to always see that with psychiatrists because they're just flat out aren't enough to go around. And so I think it's something that's always been there below the surface. And if you were faced with a mental health crisis where you needed to be evaluated and needed a partial hospitalization program or an inpatient program, sometimes you were left waiting. And now I think the pressure is showing more and more cracks in the foundation, so to speak. Just more and more gaps in the system, and the mental health system, just like we've seen in the medical system, in the school systems, and just all of these things. So yes, again, to try to bring it back around, yes, there is a mental health crisis in America currently. Craig, again, thank you for submitting that. Hope you're doing well in Charm City, and feel free to hit us up again with another great question. Our next question comes from Melissa Anderson in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Thank you, Melissa, for submitting your question. So the question is, how do I get my kid to go to counseling? Oh, man. This one has limited information, but this is a question that we get all the time. Does my kid need therapy? And how do I get them to want to go? And usually what I tell people is, one, don't surprise your kid and just spring it on them. Don't, kidnap them and just plop them in front of a therapist or in front of a screen if it's teletherapy. Give them some heads up, explain to them, concerns that you have, and that you are scheduling it. Definitely, look up the therapist. Almost every therapist, and I don't even know any that don't have a website. They have a profile on their website, the about page. So, show that to your child, familiarize them with the person before the session. And I always try to keep it really down to earth. I try not to make it the principal's office. And I tell parents that all the time, don't bring your kid to me and you, the parent, monopolize all the time telling me all the bad things that are happening or that they're doing wrong or things like that. You wouldn't like it if somebody did that to you. You wouldn't want to be there. You wouldn't want to talk. You would be very resistant. And so a lot of times I try to tell parents that, if there's really a lot of information that you feel you need to pass on to me, maybe that's setting up an individual session at another time with just you and the therapist. That may be a phone call or an email, but really trying not to do that in front of the therapist, um, because it really just sets things off on really rough footing, and it makes the job for the therapist that much harder. And it's understandable that your kid's not going to want to be a part of that. Um, so the yeah, I again, don't surprise them, make them aware of who they're going to see, and don't turn it into the principal's office where they're being punished. um, Try to make it as positive an experience as you can. That may be, um, you know I have clients that they have a favorite fast food restaurant or something like that that they get to go to after the session. I also really try to explain to parents, you know, don't be surprised if the kid doesn't want to talk. Um, so if they're not, don't get mad at them in the session. Try and putting pressure on them, especially if it's something to do with depression or anxiety. It's natural that they're not gonna like just open up and be this flood of information with a complete stranger. Um, so if they are being very silent, or in some smaller kids, a lot of times they may regress where they hide behind mom or dad, or they're kind of like bury their head in mom's arm, or um, talk in a different voice, or talk to the parent instead of to the therapist. you know I usually try to have parents just let that ride. Try not to make a huge deal out of it. They'll warm up eventually, hopefully, and it won't always be like that, but I get that it's like that a lot of times in the first session. um, Again, I try to keep it as lighthearted and down to earth as I can. I try to, make jokes here and there and try to put people at ease, because I get that it's a pretty uncomfortable situation the first time around. And I often try to spell out for people, most people, they don't need lifetime type of care. So I usually try to explain that to the teens that I work with, that look, I get that you don't want to be here, and my job is for us to end this at some point, for us to break up, so to speak, um, so that I'm not working with them their whole lives. And I think sometimes spelling that out for kids so they get an understanding of like, okay, this isn't going to be like for forever. Um, so trying to make them aware of that. Um, and I would say sometimes, having them take an active role in it. If you're searching for somebody, if you're on like a Psychology Today, or um, the Gottman Referral Network, or Therapy Den, or things like that. Um, have them look through who the particular counselor is, and being able to get their feedback on what are they comfortable with. Um, in today's world, at least, the teletherapy has opened up so many options. Now, I get that teletherapy does not work for everybody. I know that not everybody loves it. Certain issues, certain types of people, especially younger kids, they're not great at just sitting in front of a screen for 45, 55 minutes. um, but it does really open up a lot of options in terms of scheduling flexibility, in terms of more access to a larger pool of clinicians. So looking at that as an option is always a plus, but I also understand if that's not doable for everybody. Um, so again, hope that helps. Thank you for submitting the question. This next one actually wasn't a question. It's a little bit more of a public service announcement. Um, off of that topic of telehealth and that really opening up options in your state. So what I'm talking about right now is the Counseling Compact. So if you go to the American Counseling Association's website, which is counseling.org, and you just type in Counseling Compact, it'll take you to a page that explains what I'm about to unpack. So essentially, I am licensed in the state of Pennsylvania. I don't hold any license to practice professionally counseling anyone in other states. So let's say I had a client that they moved to, Ohio or Alaska or wherever. I'm not able to continue working with them unless I get a special dispensation, or some states, a lot of states during the pandemic really relaxed the restrictions and kind of opened things up. But a lot of those have either come to an end or are coming to an end in the very near future, like by the end of the year. So essentially in January 2019, the American Counseling Association hired the National Center for Interstate Compacts to target this counseling compact. So specifically, the purpose of the compact is to promote interstate practice of licensed professional counseling, essentially opening up availability for access to a lot more counselors. So it would open up potentially the ability for me to practice in other states and get a privilege to practice, essentially, in states that are participating in this compact. So once 10 states join the compact, a commission will be created to oversee the facilitation of interstate practice. So currently, I could potentially get licensed in other states, but it is a very cumbersome process, and not every state is equal. Every state right now essentially has different requirements. Some require different exams. Some require different number of hours of supervised experience in order to qualify for licensure. It's kind of all over the map, literally and figuratively. So currently, where things stand, there are 2 states that have signed this into law. So Georgia and Maryland have passed legislation signing the compact into law. So there are bills that are pending in Nebraska, Tennessee, and North Carolina, and up to about 15 other states that have expressed interest in the compact and are preparing to introduce the bill during the 2022 legislative sessions. So the reason I'm bringing this up is this could completely change the counseling landscape. That question that we got from Craig at the beginning of the show that talks about, is there a mental health pandemic right now? Is there a mental health crisis? That would change that potentially. That would open up so much more access for people to other therapists, and the lack of resources might shift dramatically. So essentially what I want you all to do, if you're hearing my voice, go to counseling.org and type in Counseling Compact. Get information about this. Find out what your state is doing and contact your senators, contact your legislators, and let them know that you want the Counseling Compact to be signed into law. Again, once 10 states do that, it's going to open that up, and counselors that are licensed in one of those states are able to get the privilege of practice. Now, that doesn't change who can get licensed, okay? So the compact does not change the process or requirements of any state in licensing counselors, okay? It doesn't apply to the initial licensure. It applies to the ability to get licensed in other states and essentially make reciprocity actual reciprocity, because unfortunately it's called that, but it's not that easy. So if you have questions, go to counseling.org. If you have other questions that you want to shoot in to the podcast, I'd be happy to try to answer them for you. But do yourself and everybody else you know a favor and contact your legislators to let them know about this. All right. So public service announcement over. I know that was a long-winded one, but it's really a huge deal. So you're listening to OTC episode 72, question and answer session. We'll be right back after a brief word from our sponsor.
Would you like to talk to a counselor but can't find the time? Would you rather talk to someone from the comfort of your own home? If so, Parenting and Family Solutions is here to help. We now offer teletherapy to all clients who reside in the state of Pennsylvania. Using our secure portal, you can have a video session with your counselor using a laptop, desktop computer, or smartphone. Visit our website to learn more at www.parentfamilysolutions.com or give us a call at 717-602-5560 to see if teletherapy might be a good fit for you. Let us help you build a stronger family and a healthier you.
All right, so next question is from Stacy Crane in Columbus, Ohio, and she is asking, when should I seek a psychiatrist for my child? So this is another great question. Stacy, thank you. So most times people are going to go to their primary care doctor, pediatrician, if they think that there's concerning behaviors, whether that's anxiety or depression or possibly ADHD. And I'm in support of that. I understand that often you will go to somebody you're familiar with, somebody you're comfortable with, and that not everybody has a psychiatrist, that they work with or are connected to. So it's understandable that you would go through your primary care doctor or your pediatrician. But I would also say it's worth checking into a psychiatrist in your area and seeing about getting on the books and getting what we call a psychiatric evaluation. And what that is that initial appointment for them to really take a look at things and get background information, get history, and determine whether, what is presenting warrants medication management and whether that person is a good candidate for that. And they really are going to evaluate that. It's not like you just, stop in for 5 minutes and they just throw a bunch of pills at you. They're really going to evaluate that. Primary care doctors, in my experience, most primary care doctors are comfortable prescribing, ADHD meds, antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds, sometimes sleep aids, sometimes faster acting anti-anxiety meds for dealing with like anxiety or panic attacks. But once you start getting into, okay, this person's really having a lot of side effects, and they've tried out a med or two, and now they're on to their third, and it's still not working, or there's some side effects going on, or they have multiple issues where they're taking this med to counteract this and another med. Like once you start getting into major cocktails of medications, typically they're going to send you to a psychiatrist for further evaluation and to work with that psychiatrist for the med management. And the other thing I often stress for people is, with psychiatry, that is what they do. That is what they focus on. That is everything they are trained for. So nothing against primary care doctors, but they're typically, fielding all kinds of things, and there's obviously a much larger caseload of need, that a primary care doctor is dealing with. I mean, they're dealing with, the COVID stuff, the flus, the croup, the ADHD stuff, the bedwetting, it's just all over the place. Whereas a psychiatrist is really just focused on that mental and behavioral health, the sleep, and things like that. So I often prefer clients to work with a psychiatrist. Again, I understand they're not just like falling from the skies, and that it may be working, starting off with your primary care doctor while waiting to become a patient of a psychiatrist. But often when it's starting to get into those heavier waters, when it's multiple diagnoses, very concerning behaviors, especially with depression and suicidality, self-injury, things like that, really, I wouldn't say like, drastic emotional swings, but when they're really struggling with meltdowns that are very damaging, last, beyond 30 minutes, and are, can be multiple times a day or multiple times a week. Those are a lot of those signs that say, okay, that's really time to call in somebody to add to the team. Uh-oh. The police. It's just the busy street that I live on. Gotta love it. So again, thank you, Stacy, for sending in that question. Again, it's one that we get quite a lot, and I know parents are very hesitant. I myself have had similar concerns of, I don't just want to put my kid on pills. Sometimes that is our own negative experience from past, and the past is the past. Psychiatric medication has come a long ways over the last couple of decades, and it's changed quite a bit. So we've learned a lot about what works, what doesn't, what things to look for and to stay on top of. So sometimes we, as parents, sometimes we can cause more damage by refusing to look at a potential tool or a potential option or resource in our bag because of past experience or because of negative stigmatism or things like that. So again, hope that helps. All right, so the last question for this episode comes from Michael Sardina in Washington, D.C., and he asks a really great question. It's one that we get all the time, which is, what are the different levels or types of care or services in mental and behavioral health? And again, this is one that so many people struggle with, and it's such a, even like area to area, county to county, state to state. I mean, it can be so different. There's so many different names for things, different types of programs, and often people are trying to navigate this very confusing web of services and often more like a patchwork at the worst times of their lives, or a loved one or a family member's life, when things are going really bad and mental or behavioral health services are needed. That is not the time to try to be navigating this landscape. And so to try to, scratch the surface on this, because this could be an entire podcast all of its own, like just a podcast focusing on the different levels and types of treatment. So to start at the lighter end of the scale, and Cigna actually does a really good job. They have a document. If you go to apps.cignabehavioral.com and you look up levels of mental health care, they have a pretty good description of it. So there is what's known as outpatient care, which is you do not stay there, you're not living there. You go to the location where the service is provided for a short period of time, typically an hour, 2 hours, and then return home, go about the rest of your day. So within outpatient care that's your 12-step program. So, your Alcoholics Anonymous, your Gamblers Anonymous, those 12-step types of programs. There's what's called routine outpatient care. So that could be individual counseling, that could be medication evaluation and medication management with a psychiatrist, that could be group therapy. So those are, your more run-of-the-mill, I would say, outpatient, where, kind of like I do with Parenting and Family Solutions, of individual couples, family counseling, things like that. Then next step up is the intensive outpatient program, what's often referred to as an IOP. So this is structured treatment that tries to teach how to manage stress, how to cope better with emotional and behavioral issues. It may include group, individual, and family therapy components. Typically consists of frequent visits, usually 3 to 5 days a week, an average of 3 to 4 hours of treatment per day. So again, it's a step up. It's a more intensive program. Then beyond that is your partial hospitalization program, so often referred to as a PHP or partial. And so this is an intensive structured program at a hospital. Typically, you're going to the hospital for the day, but you're not staying overnight. So it typically consists of 5 to 7 days per week, 6 hours each day. It's similar to intensive outpatient, where it'll include group, individual, and family therapy when appropriate. Often includes an evaluation by a psychiatrist. And again, it's beneficial for those that are at risk of inpatient acute care, which I'll get to next, or it's as a step down for those who have been hospitalized. So sometimes if you've been hospitalized, you might transition to a partial hospitalization program to kind of continue stepping down the levels of care, working your way towards outpatient and medication management and things like that. So inpatient care, or what's sometimes referred to as inpatient acute care. So that's intended for people who need 24-hour care, daily doctor visits in a hospital setting to stabilize psychiatric issues. So I often try to explain to people that they sometimes have this Batman, Gotham, Arkham Asylum sort of view of mental health. You think of a lot of the movies, scenes where it's 1950s, 1960s type of institutionalization, and that's not what today's inpatient hospitals are. Inpatient hospitalization is designed to stabilize a person, keep them alive, keep them safe, and in order to return them home and to their normal environment. It's not meant for long-term stays. It typically is 24 hours, can go for a couple of days. Some people, I always say, like, people who end up staying long term is like 5 to 7 to 10 days, and that's a long stay in today's inpatient acute care. Typically, again, they would be transitioned to a different level of care, either before they even make it to 10 days or after that 10-day mark. So they might be transitioned to a partial hospitalization or an intensive outpatient program. And then beyond that, there's inpatient residential. So this is sort of the most intensive services it's only considered when, all available and appropriate outpatient approaches and IOPs and partials and things like that have been exhausted. And it's intended for people who do not need medical attention, but they may need psychiatric. They will often have group, individual, family component. So again, it's all of those services together in an inpatient residential, so they are living there, facility. Beyond that, there's also early intervention. So this is important for parents and families to understand that if they have an infant or small child that they have concerns about behavior, they're not making developmental milestones, their growth, their eyesight, their hearing, their speech, things like that. That would be where you're contacting early intervention for your area. So for Pennsylvania, so like looking up your county's, behavioral health and developmental services website, that might be just typing in early intervention. So for Pennsylvania, if you go to education.pa.gov and look up early intervention, that can take you there, and it has the different numbers and email addresses to make a referral and get connected. So that would be somebody typically coming to your house and doing an evaluation, an observation of your child and determining, okay, yes, it seems like they are struggling in this area. It seems like they are not able to hear, or their developmental milestones are not being met. And that would be, okay, we're going to put you in touch with speech pathology or physical therapy, occupational therapy, things like that. And sometimes this is where an autism spectrum type of diagnosis might get identified. It can also identify a number of different struggles that a child or a family might have. So in addition to that, there are a number of community-based resources. So again, this might be contacting your county's developmental and behavioral health services. So in Pennsylvania, there is what's known as IBHS. So you got to love that, they come up with all these like ridiculous acronyms and initials. And it's just like this alphabet soup that makes it so confusing with like IOP and PHP. So IBHS is Intensive Behavioral Health Services. So this is typically in the home, in the school, in the community types of services where a school district might have contracted with an agency that provides IBHS services in the school. So that might be a counselor that meets with a student one-on-one. They might be in the classroom from time to time, observing and stepping in if they're needed. If that's helping a child de-escalate that normally really struggles with that on their own or isn't able to emotionally regulate themselves and de-escalate before getting violent, getting angry, things like that. But it can be for a lot of things. A lot of families really balk at community services in the home, in the school, because they're concerned about a negative stigmatism. But it's one that we refer to so often. It really can be extremely beneficial because there are times when your traditional outpatient counseling is not getting much traction, or it's not identifying some of the core issues and able to work on some of those elements, especially if it's issues with family members, relationships in the home setting, things like that, that's where IBHS, or in other states, and again, this is part of what makes it so confusing, is different states have different names for their programs. So in Virginia, I know that a lot of it was therapeutic day treatment that was in the school. Intensive in-home was in the community, in the home setting. So again, it's reaching out to some of these agencies, some of the county websites or state websites to really look at, okay, what are the options here, and trying to get a case manager, get somebody, if that's a school counselor, some of the people within your circle already, or community, that have a little bit of the knowledge of like, okay, this is the problem. This is what I think are the different resources that we need to check out and see what's what. So again, this is giving you, I wouldn't even say the 10-cent tour of this. Again, this is a topic that we could devote, years and years to and never get to the bottom of it. So bottom line is trying to learn a little bit about this and have it in your back pocket if you have situations that arise that, okay, I think this loved one or this family member or myself may benefit. So checking out those state and county websites is probably your best go-to. All right. Michael, thank you for the question. Hope it helped. So there you have it, OTC listeners. Thank you for stopping by. Thank you to all the listeners who are sending in questions. I think it was a great batch of questions tonight. Again, stuff that we get all the time that, I wish everybody had some of this information about, psychiatrists and community resources and just where things are at in our state or in our country in terms of mental and behavioral health services. So catch you all next episode. Take care.